Yeah, so I wanted to talk about like what the state of reuse and recycling is in the US, because I think it's important to have just like a basic understanding of that when you're thinking about reusing materials. And this is just some charts that I pulled off of the EPA website, and they're comparing the waste generated in the US to the recycling that is happening in the US. And the things that I really wanted to point out in this comparison is that about 20% of the waste we're generating in the US is getting recycled in any way. And that's not necessarily, high quality recycling situations, that's just any form of recycling. And then out of that recycling, the vast majority of that is paper. So most of the market for recycled materials and recycling in general is centered on paper. And then metals and glass are pretty well represented in proportion to like our low rate of recycling and how much they're being thrown away. But plastics are really poorly represented at like 4.5-ish% of recycling that's going on in the US, but 12% of what we're throwing away. And textiles are not that great either. All right, so even more statistics. So when something is recycled also, it's not necessarily done in the US. So a lot of our recycling infrastructure is in other countries, and we're shipping our recycling to other countries to get recycled. And pretty recently, so one of those countries was China, and pretty recently they said like this is causing lots of problems for us, pollution. We're also producing so much of our own recycling. We need to use our infrastructure to recycle our own trash, and have kind of stopped taking US recycling. And this has kind of caused a crisis within the US like recycling infrastructure. And yeah, the US recycling infrastructure is like broken in many ways. So I've been starting to read this book called Secondhand, which is talking about like where things go when they're being reused and recycled. And one of the statistics in here is that about a quarter of what we put into the recycling bin is kind of immediately thrown away because it's contaminated in some way. So there's lots of issues around recycling, the point of this. And then you might be asking like, well, what about reuse? And it's really hard to find accurate statistics on reuse, but some of them are in this really awesome book. And one of the ones that I just want to read to you is, all right, so of reusable materials, Americans in 2015 threw out 24.1 billion pounds of furniture, 32 billion pounds of textiles, and 45.3 billion pounds of miscellaneous durables, which is like a catch-all category that is like tools and phones and laptops and puzzles and like all of that stuff. And it's really hard to track like, so what's happening to this stuff, like how much of it is being reused. But one reuse center that keeps information statistics on this is the Goodwill. And Goodwill is the biggest kind of organization that does reuse in the United States. And they collect and divert more than 3 billion pounds of this stuff from the landfill. But that is only 3% of what we're producing. And that was just all statistics from 2015. So that is like very wonderful that that's happening, but we really do have a system that is not working as well as we might hope it would. But that being said, reducing and like reusing, like our waste is this like really wonderful opportunity space. So we have some infrastructure for for recycling, and some infrastructure for reuse, but we could have like so much more. So one way to think about reuse and like how we could start adding more infrastructure for reuse is splitting it into kind of household reuse and like individuals reusing our own stuff, the things we're buying, and then industrial reuse. So on the household reuse side, there's bringing things to transfer stations and like dumps, and within that there's like swap shops and things like that. There's lots of like really incredible online reuse platforms like Craigslist, and the Buy Nothing Network on Facebook is really cool, and things like that. There's free piles and free boxes, so like the Smith free boxes are one way to do this. And then there's just like, you know, filling your home with stuff, and, you know, being able to reuse on a very like personal level. And then on the industrial side of things, there's reusing within industry, which is really like fabulous when it happens, but there's that's kind of like voluntary from that company to make that effort to reuse. There's a nonprofit called Recycling Works, which is really wonderful. It helps companies reduce their waste streams in general, and then find homes for goods that are reusable. And then there's this idea of having some kind of like local storage space that is capturing industrial waste streams and then redistributing them to schools and maker spaces and things like that. And that's kind of what design thinking is trying to start doing more of. And we're working with a bunch of different partners. So Smith Cycle, which is trying to capture like waste streams from Smith students, and the Old Stone Mill Center, and a few other people. And that is like a really great opportunity, because also industrial sources of waste, they're usually really clean and really high quality. By working with one company, you're diverting like far more waste than you would be by working with individuals. So that's also reasons to potentially focus on industrial reuse. Yeah, so I'm sure you all know this, but like the order in which to do things is definitely still like reducing first and then reuse and then recycle, because of many different reasons. But really, yeah, really, if we can do it, like this is the order you would want to do things in, and this is like the EPA says this. Everyone is, yeah, this is pretty like well known. And then like the question is how to do this, and how to kind of start like fixing our broken recycling and reducing and reusing systems. So like the most successful way that this has happened is really through like legislation and regulations. So in like San Francisco, about 80% of what is thrown away is actually recycled. And that's because there are laws in place that are shifting the burdens of disposal of waste onto companies, and companies are contributing to that infrastructure for recycling. And then also there are regulations in place saying that the city is only going to be buying products that use a certain amount of recycled materials. And that's really important, because it's creating this whole market that values recycling and makes recycled materials valuable, which is a huge problem, because for some materials like plastics, it can actually be cheaper to buy new plastic as a company than to buy recycled plastic. And that is like, why is that? We can change that with regulations. So if you are like a voter in the US, you know, you can try to support any legislation that comes up around reduce and reusing and recycling. And then on an individual level, you can kind of do the same thing on like a much smaller scale. So like reducing what you're buying, potentially just asking like if it's something that you're going to throw away later, like probably don't buy it, or see if you can find some other way of buying it. And then also like supporting secondhand markets in the US. If we can make secondhand goods valuable, that's a great incentive to not throw them away. So buying from Goodwill is actually like great in terms of supporting this whole infrastructure. And then in terms of recycling, just making sure that you're not throwing trash into the recycling, and like washing recycling and things like that is really important. Also, I think reuse is really cool because it's a way of like redistributing resources. I think if it's done really well, you can be taking things from like companies and redistributing them down to people who need them. And that's really exciting. And it's, yeah, ultimately, like these are also problems with like capitalism and just this economy that's requiring exponential growth. If there's anything we can do to like regulate capitalism and move towards different economic systems, that's really helpful too, I think. Yeah. So at Smith, this looks like so much stuff that gets reused. So Rachel Ween at Seeds started the Smith Cycle program along with Emmy Longnecker, who is a Smith alum but was a student a few years ago. And this is all of the reusable stuff that they captured from Smith students in 1 year. So there's a lot of textiles and a lot of other stuff. And something to know about textiles that go to a place like Goodwill or Salvation Army, about a third of them will get like sold in the store, but everything else a lot of times gets shipped overseas. And sometimes that's great and it's useful to countries, and sometimes it can create a lot of like local pollution and social issues. So yeah, by using, shirts, these came from Smith Cycle that would have otherwise gone to Goodwill, and yeah, that's where these came from. And yeah, there is this big question about, let's see if I can keep playing this, about Smith Cycle with how can we retain these, in some cases, like really incredible resources and give them to incoming Smith students instead of potentially, ending up sending them overseas to somewhere where we don't know what's necessarily happening to them.
And Laura, I don't know if you've met Sophie before, who's in the room, but Sophie's actually helping us run the Smith Cycle program this year.
Yay! That's wonderful, Sophie. Yay. It's like such a good program, and I'm really impressed with how successful it's been after only existing for like 2 years. It's very cool. Okay, so if you're wondering if you had like a hospital Johnny, where that came from, it came from the Old Stone Mill Center's Linens Project. So they partnered with this company named Ladco, that they're just like a normal mid-sized linen companies that operates in Western Mass. And they actually throw away tons of linens per year. And the recycling system for textiles is really pretty rough. Like anything that's cotton can usually be recycled, but anything that's synthetic, there's just no real path for recycling it yet. there are a few things, like you can make carpets with like polyesters, but it's not very common. So these folks were just like, they had this dumpster. I think I have another slide of, yeah, they have a dumpster that was just full of these usable linens. And Lenny at the Old Stone Mill Center decided to start collecting them. And this partnership was born, where she is distributing sheets and bedding and chef's coats and these hospital johnnies and all sorts of things out to shelters and maker spaces and fire departments and individuals. And then, so that's where, yeah, and that's also, let's see, this, the Old Stone Mill Center is where any like twine, if you got any twine, where that came from. And a lot of like weird materials that we have at DTI also came from here, which is pretty fun. And then myself and Lenny and Rachel and some other community partners are really hoping to start something similar to the Old Stone Mill Center that is more local to Northampton. So they're based in Adams, but there's lots of materials that are being thrown away from industry that are like right here in the valley that we could be salvaging and reusing. And the vision for that network is that we would have some kind of storage space in Northampton and be able to take these materials and redistribute them really locally. And there's lots of people already working on this who are great partners, but there's no one here in Northampton who is really doing that work quite yet. And there's just so many cool things that you can make with reused materials. So crocheting is like great because you can kind of make anything with crochet. And I actually have this bag here. Lenny gave it to me to show all of you. And I also have this like cute little pot. So yeah, you can absolutely make these things, or a rug, or kind of whatever you want with crochet. And we have, again, an infinite supply of linens. So if you run out, it might take me a while to get more linens from Lenny, but I certainly can. And you can have as much fabric as you want to use for crochet. And then we also, at the Western Mass Creative Reuse Network, we did collect a bunch of political signs after the election. So if you want to make new signs, you can just like spray paint over these and make your own signs. It's really fun. We have all the materials for that at Design Thinking. And then also the bag share project, we've got all the supplies for that. So old like feed bags and malt bags that you can turn into tote bags with a grommet machine. So if like your house wanted to do a workshop, you could borrow our bag share like equipment and run a small workshop outdoors with your house. And there's also, this is like a small segment of the things you can do that are like creative and fun with reused materials. We have just so many materials at DTI, and I would, if this is like intriguing to you, I would definitely encourage you to explore them. Yeah.